listening to that and looking at the breakdown of people in prison by offence. So the biggest category of offence for people in prison is violence, 24,000 people. The next biggest is actually sexual offences, 15,000. But if I were to draw up a list of people to be released early, there are other offences I would go well before I got to people who've committed sexual offences where there are victims, which is the problem you're discussing. The problem, people are being released and victims say, they've got, quite rightly say, I don't want this person released early. They committed an appalling act and I feel unsafe.
And victims are always going to say they shouldn't be released early, and that is as it will always be. I think the point here is this government was allowed to make these changes based on the fact that there would be protections for victims, because some of these perpetrators are people who will have pursued these women. They will be domestic abusers. They will be people who do things which don't quite meet the threshold of being prosecuted, but make these women's lives unlivable. And these people, unless they are monitored, unless there is a proper risk assessment, there is a real risk here to the safety of women and children and families. And this government has been allowed to do this as long as those protections are in place. And there are women now receiving letters who do not have the guarantee of those protections.
But I go back to a first principle. Why are they letting people who've committed sexual offences out at all? There are 6,000 people in prison who've committed theft. I'd let them out before sexual offenders. There are 9,000 people in prison who've committed drug offences.
Well, I mean, and they will likely be on much shorter sentences. I think the problem here is those on longer sentences and the prison capacity. It's a huge problem, and governments successively should have built more.
I totally get that, but why not? But if there's 85,000 people in prison, why don't you get rid of 15,000 who've done drug offences and theft?
So I suspect that we may be talking about different categories of prisons, but I think we're going to have to look into it a bit more to find out where the stretch is.
Because there's an interesting question: why people who've committed sexual offences why are they being let out at all?
In an ideal world, they shouldn't be.
No.
But I think when we all accept we've got a problem, we've got to deal with the problem. We've got to do something about it. And this, by the way, has been a successive policy over many years.
The Conservatives did it as well. Absolutely right.
But the protections have been guaranteed, and right now they're not there.
I just wonder whether they must have looked at this, but maybe it's not possible. But you've got to imagine someone said, maybe just don't let out violent sex criminals at all, and then try and make our changes elsewhere to limit our chance of doing that, but they've obviously not managed to do that. Very strong reaction of that coming into the response from the government. They haven't put in place all the protections, but is that on them or is that on the Conservatives? They want to make it the fault of the Conservatives. Not everyone is accepting that excuse.